folks. My name is Todd Von Dijk. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Veterinary Technician Educators, and we are thrilled that you're here for what I think, Jess, correct me if I'm wrong, is week 4 of our Fireside Chat series. Are we on 4, Jess?
3.
3. I'm always, as she tells me, I'm always a step ahead of myself, and I need to get back to where we are. It's week 3, but the great part is that we're still booked out for many more weeks to come. So this series ain't going anywhere, and we're just kind of thrilled and tickled that we have this new platform to connect with y'all and just to make sure that we're all a community, because I'm not sure there's not much more important than that as we go. We'll get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. We've already got 10 on the line. Steve, this is going to be a fun time.
Looking forward to it. I'm glad to be here.
And of course, to my 12 friends on the line, if you want to start the AVTE tradition of checking in and saying hello over the chat box, we'll give you a nice little shout out. It's cool to have you. And it's always fun to see how far we travel in these weekly conversations. A little, if you're also thinking about it, you can keep up with what's coming up in the future on the events page on the Facebook group. And tell you to take a look because we just announced our virtual conference. We couldn't be in St. Louis this August, but we are going to get together 1 day a month in August, September, and October with a full day of programming that I think you'll find interesting, and we hope that you'll join us for that as well. Murray State's in the house. Thanks for coming, Debbie. This is a live chat, and of course, I'll give you the sounds from afar. This happens to be our chief something or other here, my son, Evan. Hello from Mississippi State. Tiffany, we're excited too about the conference. California, we've hit the coast because the home office is now in New Jersey, so we've hit both coasts and are working our way inward, it seems. Now on Facebook, you've gotten to see Evan. Hello, Ohio. Debbie, we're glad you're here and just hope you'll keep coming. You'll let us know what other topics you're interested in. Augusta, Maine, we're hitting up in the Northeast. Canada. Oh, I love it how we always manage to get, this is such a community gathering when we get going here. We'll get started in about another 2 minutes just so that nobody misses anything because we've got a lot of great content today and we're lucky to have Steve McLaughlin with us to talk about effective study strategies for VTNE. Washington State, hello, Pima. Jamie, glad you're here. Now, we always have you check in because that's also your reminder of how you ask questions as we go. Jim Harrell, so glad you're here. Even, and I even got to talk to you 20 minutes ago about something else. Hello, Purdue, UMass Amherst, New Jersey. Steve, we got them coming from everywhere for you today.
Oh, I'm flattered and honored.
All right, I've got about 3 after the hour, so I think we ought to get started. I think, Jess, are you doing intros today?
I've got the intro, yes.
Well, then why don't you take it off? I'm going to mute my screen or turn off my screen, mute my mic, and we'll be back at the end after the presentation.
Sounds good. Now, I looked up how to pronounce some of these words, Steve, so if I mispronounce them, please correct me.
Okay, well, we could do the talk in Spanish if you prefer.
Oh, I don't know if that'll help.
Okay.
Dr. Stephen McLaughlin is a graduate from Cornell School of Veterinary Medicine, class of '91. He did mixed practice on the shores of Lake Ontario in northern New York and in Ecuador as a Peace Corps volunteer, where he worked with campesino farmers in the high Andes and learned how not to ride a horse. As a disease detective for the US CDC, Dr. McLaughlin worked for 9 years on public health problems ranging from tuberculosis in prison inmates to polio in Nepal, elephantiasis. Oh, no, I had it. Elephantiasis.
Very good. Perfect.
Yes. Okay. Elephantiasis in Haiti and Japanese encephalitis in China and India. His lifelong interest in teaching and effective learning models led him to start the Zuku Review online veterinary test prep service. So without further ado, turn it over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Jessica. It's a real pleasure to be here, everybody. My name is Dr. Steve McLaughlin. That's my direct email address there if you need it. This is a talk. We usually do a longer version of this for students, and it's sort of built around helping them get excited and motivated and oriented to concepts of getting ready effectively for one of these big high consequence exams like the VTNE. For this talk, I've shortened it a bit and I've added some information that sort of builds on what we saw last summer at AVTE in New Orleans when Dr. Julie Schell gave an excellent keynote lunchtime talk on some of the new advances that have happened in what we know about adult learning, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. So we're going to try to apply some of that today to VTNE prep. At the end, I'll be running through some practice questions with folks. So if we run out of time, we just won't do them all. But I'd be happy to take questions at the end as well. For what it's worth, if any of you want me to do a webinar just for your students at some point, I'd also be happy to do that. We do these all the time. To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. Leonard Bernstein. So this is not news to any student or any teacher anywhere, but I hope that we can leave you with thoughts about how to help students develop a better plan for learning more effectively and also taking tests a little more strategically. Today I'll go over 4 things. We'll cover a little bit about the structure of VTNE, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time there because I'm sure most of you have seen that. There is some new news to hear about COVID, which is affecting test dates. We'll talk about learning through testing. It's called retrieval practice, and this is the big development in the world of adult learning. And along the way, we're also going to talk about using images as memory anchors, because whether a question has an image in it or not, an image is often the thing that comes to our minds when we're presented with a case. So I'd like to use some examples of this as ways to help people study more effectively. And then in the last bit, we'll practice some strategic test-taking techniques, how to be more savvy. This is some of the new news about VTNE and COVID-19. The VTNE and the other veterinary licensure exams, NAVLE and BCSE, have all been deemed essential. And that means that the testing sites are operating in the United States, but at a 50% capacity to allow for social distancing. If you're in Canada, this is not the case. The PSI testing centers in Canada are still closed. What it means is that there are fewer people per day can take any of the exams. Right now, the spring testing window has been extended through June 30th. That is the final extension they're going to do. And people need to either defer to a later date if they're not going to take it before then, or they need to get themselves scheduled. The summer VTNE window has also been extended. Now it's no longer 1 month wide, it's a 2-month window, July and August. So there's a little more time to take it. Finally, should we expect extensions of the time testing window in the November-December one? Nobody knows, but I think it's certainly possible because it's not that hard to do these days. If you want more information, the AASVB website is definitely the place to go. This is just from their website, which shows some of the revised dates that people are dealing with. But the key one today is to be aware that these are the dates to get your applications taken care of by July 10th at the very latest, okay? Let's see here. So here in a nutshell is how we think we learn. If you ask students or even ask most of us, how do we think we learn? We think we learn by looking at books and computer information, and we stick it in our head like a safe, like a locked box. And then when we want to go get the information later, we pull it out. There's a problem with this. This is how we think we learn, but the problem is it's not that easy to get the information out of that safe. Also, frankly, long-term memory, the memories that are in your safe that are always there for a long term, they're not that easy to get in there just by looking at the book once, okay? How we really learn what's emerging is understanding of what's called working memory, where yes, you study and you put information in your head, but the way you really make a connection between information that you've committed to memory is through practice testing, retrieval practice, looking at the information multiple times and quizzing yourself on it. And if we can find ways to get people doing this more, you will find they get a better grip on the information. They retain better, but it's multiple encounters with the information so that by the time you take your test, you've broadened that pathway between what's on the page or what's on your computer and what's in your brain. Another theme of this talk is the power of images. There are many ways we can use images as mental duct tape to help us remember things. Now, a veterinary technician isn't necessarily going to be expected to make diagnoses or things like that, but they take a lot of radiographs, and it's not wrong to ask somebody to say, well, what do you think might be going on here? And where is it? You don't need to be, a board certified internal medicine expert to say, something is not right with that structure. And that's where the kidneys live. I think there's something wrong with the kidney. And it is. That's some form of hydronephrosis. So the image is the thing that sticks in your head, and you can use that to tack a little information too. Here's an example of a case. This is something that we've all seen relatively frequently in practice. I used to see one of these a month about. We have a 7-year-old unspayed female dog, and it's presented. The dog has a big pot belly, has a high fever, and a smelly discharge from the vulva. Now, again, you might not be a doctor, but we've all seen these cases. So what disease might we be worried about? If you guys have the chat box, feel free to type in what you think this is. So this is probably a uterus infection, right? A pyometra, pus in the uterus. But when you saw that case description, or when you heard me talk about this middle-aged female dog with a big pot belly and a high fever and pus out of the uterus, did you have this picture in your head? Even when the question that's posed to you doesn't have an image, the image is the thing that comes to mind. And you can use this as a form of like an anchor in your head to stick information to. So the question you might ask of any tech who sees one of these coming in the door for admission is, what are we going to prepare for? What are you getting ready for in the back? Well, don't let the sun set on a pyometra, right? So you're probably going to surgery. I'm not going to belabor some of the routines we've all seen. Oh, can you guys still hear me? Can you guys still hear me? We okay?
Hey, Steve, you're good.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
I
worries.
just popped it out of the slot there. So we've all seen some of the basic information about VTNE structure. A take-home message to remember is they're going to be tested on a multiple choice test. It's a 3-hour test, and 20 of the questions that they throw at you will not count. They're going to grade you on 150 questions that count. It's about a minute per question. But if you leave the room to go to the bathroom or something, the clock is still ticking. A take-home message about the major practice domains about VTNE for me is that there's no single category that is so small that you can ignore it, and there's no single category that's so big that it gets all your time. The biggest one is nursing, of course. This is unlike some of the other standardized tests that veterinarians have to take, where honestly you can kind of afford to skip chickens, but you cannot afford to skip dogs and cats. This is more important than it used to be. With social distancing and the more rigorous scheduling of the PSI testing centers, it's really important that you let your students know they show up early for the test, okay? The rooms are going to be more empty than they used to be, but it's still going to be the same testing experience that your students have come to expect with people separated by distance and cubicles. None of your stuff is in the room with you. This is just a summary of some of the better review tools that are out there. And if I had to pick one book, it's the Bible. It's McCurnin's clinical textbook for vet technicians. This is just, as you know, this is an absolutely superb all-in-one place book. It's got everything in it, and I think it's excellent. For educators, the workbook is super useful because it's got ready-made ways to let your students practice test. And the whole thing's available through Elsevier with an online version, which we like a lot because it means it's portable for everybody. And in these days where we're all teaching more and more virtually, this is just hands down the best resource I could pick if I could only have one. The AASVB has self-assessment tests that they will sell to you for $45. These are 75 question tests, so it's half of the length of a regular test. Very useful as a study tool. It's not that a person taking these questions would see those exact questions on their VTNE, but man, if you just look up answers to ones that you remember that gave you trouble the day you do some of these questions, it'll be like a guidepost to the format and the depth and the style of these questions. And it's a great wake-up call, you know, oh, maybe I need to know a little bit about, name that disease, pyometra. Extremely useful. Finally, the third thing, the VSPN network has a VTNE prep class that they teach online 3 times a year. This is well done. I've sat in on some of these and I've worked with some of the people that are the principals. It's based on a class. It goes, I think, an hour and a half on a Monday or a Sunday night. And they'll throw a lot of practice questions at the students, then they'll build topics around those questions. I think we may see people use this more, but more useful than this, I think, if your school already has some sort of a VTNE prep experience for students in their final semester, if I had to say, I think that might be better than a class where you don't know everybody. If you know all your friends and peers in the class, that may be very useful. However, this is a superb resource and it's well worth being aware of. So let's talk about images a little bit. These images really are like mental duct tape. And kind of the only reason this slide's here is because I thought that was a funny picture. But if we can get people to review visually more, then later when they're quizzed about that disease or that problem, it's the image that starts it all off. It's the image that sticks in the head. I mean, if I threw these notes at you, you can't help it, right? Your eye starts looking where the dog is. This is distemper, mucopurulent discharge from the nose, crusty eyes. I mean, if you see the words hyperkeratotic nasal planum, that's all distemper. Not that common nowadays, but certainly you see it in shelter animals. When I worked abroad, particularly in Latin America, we saw these things all the time. So use that, leverage it. Here we have a cat, male neutered cats presented for accidents in the house, straining to urinate. This is something we all see all the time, and technicians will be admitting patients to the exam room with this kind of a history. So the radiograph shows some bladder stones. Cat is blocked. What would the tech want to know to do to prepare? An experienced tech's going to know that we need to be preparing for, you know, IVs, analgesia, urinary catheterization. But the idea here is to use this image as sort of an anchor to get you to this piece. And I think that this is a very useful way to help people remember. So another thing you may see, if you get a question thrown at you, if there's a photo, often if there's a problem, it's in the middle, okay? That's just the way we take pictures. This happens to be a guinea pig. So the way you might frame a question around this to help people remember is you might ask students, you know, what simple test would we be preparing for if you see these? You see these in cats a lot. And the answer is a fluorescein stain. They may not be doing it, or maybe they are, but you know, these are common things. But the image gives you sort of a toehold. This is just an example of a dog with a nice ulcer there. Here's another image question. What's the most critical problem with this radiograph? This is memorably bad. Never, ever do we want to see somebody put their hand in the picture. And I'm sure we all know this, but this is a way to use the image to get stuff to stick. I couldn't help it. I got to stick this in there. Remember your big 3 things about radiation protection. Time is important to avoid retakes and use the lowest possible MAS. Distance, stay as far away as possible, and we should all be wearing shielding. Practice testing, strategic practice testing. Test performance has been shown to improve with strategic elimination. So you're basically using what you do know to narrow down options and manage anxiety on the questions, the inevitable questions where you don't know the answer. With a multiple choice question, it's important to reassure students that the good news with these tests is correct answer is guaranteed to be there. And you also really want to reassure people the bad news is you're going to have questions you don't know. That's guaranteed. It's inevitable. But the most common mistake we all make, even me, is we spend most of our time with the clock ticking on the questions about which we know the least. So the real trick is to train people or train yourself to make the best choice you can with the information you have, and then just move on. And the way you do it is strategic elimination. You just cross out the stuff you don't think fits and you guess from what's left. This is just words for what we're about to practice. So here's an example of doing those strategic elimination steps. I want to encourage you to try practicing with students to answer multiple choice questions in a new way, a different way than they're used to. Don't read the question first, read the answers first, and simply ask yourself, what kind of question do I think I'm looking at? And questions can be, you know, what disease might it be? What test do I need to do? What's my job here? You look at these 5 choices and you say to yourself, I don't know, this is something to do with vocabulary. If there's an image in a question, then you look at the picture second. So I look at this cat and I say, I don't know what this is, but his eyes look like his pupils are really small. Third step. Now you read the question. You're presented with a cat. He looks like this. What's that condition called? So you're in the ballpark. It's vocabulary, something to do with his eyes, and you've got those 5 choices. And it means little pupils. Now, maybe you don't remember what the answer is, but the answer is meiosis. This is Miosis and Mydriasis. This is an example of having used one image in a question. Now you can teach a little bit about meiosis. We see this with bright sunlight. We see it if they're treated with pilocarpine, not that common. As opposed to mydriasis, pretty common, dilated big pupils. We see this with pretreatments for anesthesia for atropine, glycopyrrolate. You can see it, it's pretty bad if you see it after trauma. That's a pretty bad sign. You can see it in a dark room, and older cats can get what's called iris atrophy. So now you've had this opportunity to talk about what's meiosis. And then you can show a picture of this. This is Horner syndrome. My third sunken toe. This is just a way to remember meiosis. Third eyelid protrudes. The eye globe sinks a bit, and so you get ptosis, which just means that the eyelid drops. And now you've got a chance to talk about ptosis, which is just a fancy Latin word that means droopy lids. So out of a picture or two, you get a lot of bang for your buck, and it's a good way to study. Here, here's a question about cells. So we're going to read our 5 choices first and ask ourselves, what kind of question is this? Something about white cells. Second, we look at the image and we say to ourselves, that's a pretty looking white cell with a bunch of red stuff in it. Probably you all know what this is. And then you look at the question, what kind of white blood cells indicated? This is a horse, and horses have the prettiest versions of this particular kind of cell. So strategic elimination, if you don't know what's going on, means you just cross out the ones you don't think fit. It's not a platelet, so I'm crossing that one out. It's not a neutrophil because that's a neutrophil on top. I think it's not a macrophage because I vaguely remember those have a round nucleus, or they can. So now we're down to lymphocyte or eosinophil. You go to Vegas, what odds you want to bet on? 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 5? 1 out of 2 is the better odds. So you take a guess and you say, I think that's an eosinophil. If you can encourage people to do this on a regular basis, then practice testing becomes not just a way they learn, but a way that they become inoculated against the anxiety of a test, and they become more strategic test takers. Here's a last example. We are looking at something to do with parasites. Okay, looking at these, and I got to tell you, even me, when I was in mixed practice, we didn't see these that often. But if you compared this to other cells, they're pretty big eggs. But anyway, I know I'm looking at some sort of egg. Not sure what it is. And then I read the question. So it's a fecal sed on a sheep. It died suddenly last night, and here's what they found in the feces. So let's cross out ones we don't think about. We don't think it is. So is that a whipworm? Definitely not. Cross that one out. Is that a hookworm? No, looks a little similar, but not the same. Cross that one out. Is it a roundworm? Super common, see these all the time. No, not that either. Cross that one out. Now, you might not know what these other two are, but you just increased your odds to 50-50 with guessing alone. That's how you play the game. And if we can get students to do this, they enjoy themselves. It becomes fun. And it's also a way to reinforce success. So when I do this talk for students, we spend a little more time doing practice questions and back and forth. People have questions about, what do I do if I can mark questions? Should I leave questions blank? Things like that. But I thought it might be a little more interesting if folks out there in the audience want to weigh in with some questions, either for me or for other people here in the audience. I'd be happy to answer as best I can. And let's see, how do I get the screen back where I see Jessica and Todd? Oh, there they are. You guys are right on it.
Well, that's our goal here. You can leave your screen share up and you've got us.
Okay.
And if folks have questions, you can certainly throw them into the Facebook chat and we'll do it. Best we can tell, we've been monitoring the chat. This is a great community, Steve. People are answering each other's questions during your talk too.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
It's nice to see everybody helping. I've got one while folks share any thoughts on their mind. So let's say you're guiding a student to this exam and you're with them 5 feet outside the door and they're about to walk in.
Mm-hmm.
What's the last word you'd say to them?
Wow, that's a great question.
Thanks.
I think for me, I think it's important to embody faith in them, let them know if they're anxious that they're normal and it's okay. I think it's important that they walk in with a sense that it's not a test they have to get 100 on. Passing is basically 70% a C. So you want to reassure them you can miss a lot of questions and still be okay. It's not a reason to take it lightly. Sure. But it is maybe something along with your sense that, I won't know every question. That's inevitable. They walk in with a more reality-based sense of what they're getting into. Makes sense.
Yeah. If you could rub a magic lamp and Bikini gave you one wish of the test makers.
Sure.
What's that thing that's eating at you year after year with this thing?
Maybe somebody out there can tell me, because I've sort of heard occasional. I would like to know for sure, do they see images when they take their actual VTNE? And if so, what percentage of the test are they? I have not found anything explicit on the AASVB site about this. I believe I've been told by other teachers that yes, there are a few questions with images, but not a lot. I think personally, it's an effective way to build a question around the kinds of things that you're going to experience when you're in practice. And so I would ask, or would like to see more of that on the VTNE and all of the licensure exams.
That makes sense. Anyone else have any questions? I think I'll be honest, Steve, I think we've answered them and I think you've talked to them and that's not a bad thing.
Okay. This was necessarily a bit short and it's a little bit of a preview of what we speak to students about. But if anybody there in the audience is interested to follow up with me in person, I'd be happy to correspond with folks if they're looking for ways to structure a curriculum to help students have some sort of a preparation experience. Sometimes it's just as simple as we've got 5 weeks, what are priorities, things like that.
Sure. We did have someone post, a couple of posts just did come through. One person said, yes, they do see images. The questions are random, so it will depend.
Okay.
A little bit of feedback. Annoying that many of the VTNE test questions are not entry-level questions, more like vet school.
Yeah.
And then a question here, which has been multiplied by a couple folks saying they love it, or they want me to make sure we ask it, and I scrolled right off it. That doesn't help. If a student suffers from anxiety or panic attacks, how can the student or teacher help them? How about your thoughts on folks who this is a very nervous room for them?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that it's fair to say that there are sort of two kinds of test anxiety. There's the normal anxiety that we all feel. I mean, I'm Dr. Zuku, and if that clock starts ticking on me, even I feel it a little bit. But that's normal, and we all have some of that. And it's important, I think, to let people not be alone if they feel that feeling, that you want to validate, yeah, man, we all have that.
We're all normal.
But there's a subset of people who have bona fide test anxiety, which gets in the way of their performance. And I think most teachers already, by the time they get to that last semester in school, they've got a pretty good idea who those folks are.
Sure.
There are things you can do. On the work side, I think, frankly, it's built around habituation and getting very comfortable taking lots and lots of tests so that it just becomes part of your routine. It's an inoculation thing. But there's other things that can be looked at, like talking to your physician about maybe anti-anxiety medications, things like that. Some people, though, can have test anxiety not because they're so anxious, but because they have a learning disability. Like the common ones that I've run into are dyslexia and ADD. If you know you're one of those people, or you have students that are like that, it's important to prepare a little earlier in your application process to get an accommodation to, sometimes you take the test in a separate room or with silencing earphones on. Often they'll give you twice as much time. And I have friends and colleagues who are dyslexic, who are highly accomplished, but they don't read like the rest of us do. And so their anxiety is something that they need some special accommodation. So I think that's an important thing to take into account. It's also, you know, it's kind of personal. So it's important to be mindful of people's privacy if you're aware of it in a student. It's not something to put out to the whole class, of course.
One of the things I love about these chats is that the entire community comes together. And our thanks to Nancy, who's the Director of Program Services at AAVSB, who noted there are images on the exam and that the AAVSB doesn't disclose the number of images on the exam for testing.
Yeah.
So grateful for that, Nancy. Thank you for jumping in. Another person asked, Steve, any thoughts on the construction of a VTNE review course in your curriculum, and what approaches do you utilize?
So we do have a VTNE course in Zuku, and one of the big things we did was when I went to my first AVTE last year in New Orleans, I met Ann Wertinger, and so we basically hired her to be one of our editors, and she's spent the entire year going through our VTNE material, partly to make sure that it's very tech-centric, but also basically we've been expanding the material a lot. So that's one thing we do. There's less information out there about the actual VTNE than there is for the other exams, and I don't know why that is. But yes, we do have a course, and it's built around practice testing.
One last question, unless one pops. Folks are asking, and I guess this is a little aside from the test that you're speaking, you're talking of. If you have any general thoughts on fill in the blank and short honor exams, we've had a lot of folks note that they've stopped doing all multiple choice.
Right. So I think for in class, for students that are part of a course and you're looking for ways to help them retain information better, like getting to the slide I had with the phrenology head. Where is he? Not that one, but come on, this one. All of that's fair game, all of it. So, having to fill in the blank, having to do matching, having to do short answer, that's all very useful as ways to broaden that path between what's in your head and what's on the page. The workbook that comes with McCurnin has got a lot of this ready-made, so there's no reason not to use that, in my personal opinion. But as they get closer and closer to the actual VTNE, I could cite you any number of studies that have shown that you want your practice testing to become as much as possible like the real thing. So multiple choice, very objective, so that by the time they walk into that test room at PSI, they've already experienced having the clock ticking. They've already experienced what it feels like to do practice questions where you don't get to see the answers as you go. So that even if it's the more scary test day, it's also a little bit familiar. That's extremely helpful.
Sure, makes sense. Well, I think this is the point where we put a little bow on it and say to Dr. Steve McLaughlin, we're just thrilled and thankful, and perhaps we could have you back at the right interval down the road, because I think folks would very much enjoy a refresher, a reminder, or a chance to reconnect on these topics.
I would love to. I think that as we all have to adapt to working more and more virtually, we're going to have to be creative about how do we frame preparation classes for everything, not just this
Sure.
licensure test prep. And I think it's an important challenge. I mean, it was probably coming anyway, but COVID has accelerated it. So we have an opportunity to come up with some creative ways to help people learn better, even if they're just, you know, at home.
Yeah, and now as the thank you posts come through, which is truly a sign that this is going out of our time. Folks, we're grateful that you joined us. A couple of reminders: this video will be on this Facebook page about 5 or 10 minutes after it's over, so you can encourage friends, colleagues, compatriots, anyone to come and check it here. We will post it to the AVTE website, where you can also get information on the virtual conference that starts on August 7th, so check it out. And we'll also have it in the AVTE newsletter that goes out weekly now during COVID-19. If you're not getting that newsletter, you can always find us and let us know, and we'll get you added to the list at help@avte.net. That's the same best address to ask if we can use if we can help you with anything, help@avte.net. I'm Todd Von Dijk, the Executive Director. That was Jess Campbell. And many thanks again to Dr. Steve McLaughlin from Zuku Review.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was a real pleasure. I enjoyed this.
Have a good day, everybody.